Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm your host. I'm Andrew, and today I'm here again with Daniel, another of your hosts. And we have a good friend of ours and actually our mentor, Sven, is joining us today. And what we're talking about comes from a question I originally asked Sven, which I'll share that dialogue in a sec. It has to do with self-intimacy. One of the things that you shared with me, Sven, in some of your writing was to say that intimacy is the letting of the private parts of ourselves be seen, which I heard that as vulnerability um, equals intimacy.
Mhm.
And so I wanted you to explain to me at the time what that meant and how that could bring me to a deeper place of intimacy with myself, because everybody's familiar with the whole cup analogy, and you have to fill your own cup before you can overflow into other people's cups. And so obviously the same thing goes for intimacy. If you want intimacy with someone else, well, you probably have to have it with yourself first. So how do you
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. Uh, I guess that's what we're calling that, right? Or you guys call that. And
Yeah.
I love the question. And I posed to you, hey, let's talk about this on video because it's a good thing to converse about. So yeah, you correctly, in my opinion, see intimacy with other people as an extension of what's going on inside of you. I happen to hold the worldview that that's true with almost everything, that you're going to rarely be able to create outside of you something that's not true inside of you. And when we lack intimacy with ourselves, we usually seek something from other people to try to fill in that gap, right? And this, as you guys know, leads to all sorts of dysfunction and emotional hardship in your life because you're chasing something from other people, something outside of yourself to try to fill something inside of yourself. That's kind of like if you're hungry, um, hoping that somebody else, if you can get them to eat, it's going to satisfy your hunger, right? So yeah, I view intimacy, as I apparently shared with you, Andrew, as letting yourself be known, um, and specifically the parts of you that are not for like public consumption. We don't walk around in culture physically naked, and we shouldn't really walk around in the world just letting everybody have access to everything. We don't wear t-shirts with our ATM pin number on them, right? Because we recognize that not everything is for everybody, and not everybody always has the ability to handle your privacy. So we kind of fundamentally understand that some things in our lives are private. And one of the reasons for that is there's risk, there's vulnerability in sharing parts of yourselves that could just be used to injure you in some way, for example, right?
Well,
And yeah,
that
go
doesn't
ahead.
make sense completely when you say just to reveal yourself as this a step of intimacy because
It does not make sense. Is that what you
no,
said?
it doesn't make complete sense for that just to be it, just to be open and essentially naked and revealing yourself to others. Isn't there a part of that has to do with acceptance and
Yeah. So this
non-judgmental,
is kind of where
not
I was going. I don't believe that we should be unconditionally vulnerable. I think that's not just um, unnecessary, but just also unwise, right? If you walked around, let's just say, with a t-shirt with your PIN number on it and your bank card, do you think somebody is going to empty your bank account?
Absolutely.
They are,
If
because
you did it,
not everybody in the world is in a place where they know what to do with another person's vulnerability, or that they would even consider doing something good with that information.
well, and I
It,
would say that's the nature of the world to some degree. You can't walk around naked, unclothed, because you might get a sunburn, you might freeze to death. It's it's not something you can judge other people for in terms of your bank account, and it's not something you can hold against the world in terms of your own self-care and protection.
Sure. Yeah, that's the world we live in. I mean, it's a really interesting conversation, maybe to talk about philosophically or spiritually how we got to be in such a world. But we are in a world where we don't make everything about ourselves known to everyone. And in my 30 years with the same woman, what I would suggest is it is a process of learning to first accept, expose, and understand deep parts of myself first, and then coming up with the courage to show them to her. Because what we're all kind of struggling with, behind the scenes, every human, is judgment. So the reason it feels so risky to share yourself with someone else is because you've spent a lifetime judging yourself quite deeply. I'm not enough of this. I'm too much of that. If I could just have more of this, if I could just be that, right? And so when it comes to external things, we spend a lot of time, energy, and resources trying to make ourselves more approvable for the public, right? This is why it's not the only reason, but it's why lots of people go to the gym. It's why people choose the car they drive, the clothes they wear. There is an insecurity that is bubbling beneath the surface in most humans that controls everything that they show other people, right? But your insides are different, in that nobody sees them. And to be honest, I think a lot of us like it that way because we don't want people to know, maybe like, hey, I really struggle with this thing, or I've done these things in my past, or sometimes when nobody's looking, this happens to me. Or hey, I did this really horrible, terrible thing, and I don't want anybody to know, right? But we carry around all this judgment about those things. And so when you're in a partnership, intimacy really comes from being able to share that stuff, and in the process to find somebody that says, it's okay, I accept you anyway. However, I think if you start with a thirst to have that kind of acceptance rather than starting with self-acceptance, it's not very effective. I did that for the first 20th to 30 years I've been in a relationship. I wanted a level of acceptance from my wife that I hadn't given myself. And that goes to this concept that Andrew raised about like what does intimacy with yourself look like? Now, I had some level of intimacy with my wife. I would say like a garden variety, uh, like most married men have after a decade or two, which is just resignation. Like, yeah, I guess this is as good as it gets. Um, and it mirrored my intimacy with self, right? So intimacy, if we're talking about letting someone see without restraint,
Yeah,
something about us, if you judge yourself and you say no, and you reject this part of yourself, and you wrap it in a black sheet and you shove it in a closet and you padlock the door, right? Like this is what shame and judgment make us do. They make us like pretty much deny entire parts of ourselves and refuse to acknowledge them, pretend they don't exist, treat them like dark rooms that are off limits. And so if you pictured yourself as a mansion or a castle with 100 rooms, now imagine that 30 of them you've just said, I'm going to pretend they don't exist. And you won't ever go in there. You don't, it's been a long time. You pretend like they don't exist, but they have some of your essence. They have some of your things, right? The things that make you you. Do you think that's going to get weird in a castle where, a huge part of your castle is something that you don't even go in? What do you think's going to happen in there? Those
you're not going
parts.
to know the whole castle.
You're not going to have access and use of the whole castle, that's for sure, right? But it's probably going to accumulate filth, darkness. It's going to get dank. Have you ever just sealed something up and not used it for a long time and then opened it again?
Yep. Doesn't
I
smell
have
good.
I have this as you guys know, I was just recently traveling, and I was going to Europe, and my point of entry was Iceland, which is means that's who did our passport control. And I handed my passport to the guy, and he's like, "Do you keep this in a safe?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "You need to be careful. These things mold." And he said that because he could smell my passport had this just dank odor from being in like one of those, fireproof safes. And before that, it must have been someplace that had moisture. It just has a nasty odor. So I'm carrying my passport around, and the odor, I can even smell it in the plane and whatnot. And it was all coming from just the odor of being in this kind of sealed, off limits place with no sunlight, no interaction, no air, right? And so imagine then, kind of as a metaphor, if you've got these parts of yourselves that as a kid you started denying because people told you that you were a bad thing, right? So you have this castle of personhood with 100 rooms, and you shut a door, right? And you start doing this around 7, and you don't open that door again. Some people never. And so somebody says, "Hey, you're fat, you're ugly, you're too short, you're too tall." In my case, I'm a tall man. I've been tall forever. And people start telling me in the first grade, "You're too tall." And as a first grader, you don't know that tall is good, bad, whatever. You're just like, well, I'm different than everybody else. This is a bad thing. People are telling me there's something wrong with me. So you start making agreements that there's something different and wrong about me. I'm not a good thing, right? And you start closing these doors. And just like my passport safe, there's odors that form in there, and there's no light, there's no air, it can't breathe. And this becomes a lot of your existence, right? And then you get in a relationship and you're like, man, I hope this person accepts me. And then you're like, oh shit. It's okay if I say that on your podcast. You're like, hey, what is this person going to think about all these rooms? Like they're going to come over to my castle and I'm going to be like, yeah, we don't go in there. Is that inviting? Right?
Well, it's interesting because with your passport metaphor, I think you could even take it a step deeper where you weren't even intending to lock that out and let it, become moldy. Where there's parts of ourselves where we do that. We're like, I don't want to accept this part of myself. But then there's parts of ourselves we think we do accept that we thought we put into good storage and we really didn't. And they do need love still too.
Yeah.
And in the first 5 minutes of speaking, I feel like you honestly brought about the answer to my question originally weeks ago, because you started speaking and it allowed me to start processing thoughts to this question. And I was like, oh, well, if vulnerability, equals intimacy, um, then there's this degree of part of its acceptance, but part of it's how vulnerable am I willing to be with myself? How
Yeah.
much of myself am I willing to look at? How much of myself am I willing to say, this is like you've been talking about with the rooms, this is a room I don't like to go into, but I'll open the door anyway, right? I'll be vulnerable and walk into that room, even if it might smell, even if it might be dusty and dirty and an eyesore, right? And so that's
So
that.
can I
Yeah,
add color to that? What a lot of people do is they're hoping with, let's just say 30 of your 100 doors are closed. You haven't been in there. They're hoping that there's going to find a partner who is going to accept them, maybe even tell them, hey, you're a great castle and whatnot, even though I don't know what 30 of these rooms are like, right? And so men are trying to oftentimes, and women do this too. We're trying to get like tacit acceptance about our whole being without showing our whole being. And I would say it's great that you can get acceptance in a relationship. However, I think most people have this backwards and they're trying to receive acceptance externally without going through the internal process of going through each one of those rooms. So you do have to accept yourself, but it looks like this, Andrew. It looks like first figuring out, what have I shut the door to in my life? Like, what are the rooms And I would suggest, and you guys know this from our relationship and my courses, that your emotions are telling you all the time where your doors are closed. They reveal a pattern of that you can use to understand those closed doors. And
You know,
then what you have to do is you have to have the courage to open the door, which starts with this understanding of, I don't know what's in there. It's been a long time. I shut that door for a reason. Are there goblins in there? Are there cockroaches and spiders? What's in there? And then you have to open that door. And those doors, those rooms, by the way, I would say are stories about you. And you have to look at the stories and say, okay, well, what was I thinking when I shut this door? Um, is it reliable, or did like the 7 or 8 year old version of me find this really scary and shut it for some reason? But as a 20 something or 30 something or 50 something, do I still feel like that? Like, would I shut this door today? And if so, why? Because what made me shut that door was a conclusion that something about me was not acceptable. That's judgment and shame, right? So we have to go in and we have to not only open the door, but we have to clean it out, right? So if you were put yourself in a medieval castle, right? And you opened a door to a dark room, what is the first thing that happens when you open the door? Just as an artifact of opening the door, what enters the room before
like,
you? Light, right? So light illuminates, right? It shows us things we couldn't see. So the beautiful thing in that process is opening a door, letting light in there, and being willing to see. Maybe there's goblins in the corner. Maybe there's spiders and cockroaches and snakes and stuff that scares us. Maybe there's this thing sitting in the corner, which is a belief that I'm too short, too small, too fat, too ugly, right? That I don't have value and worth, that I'm not a good man. Maybe it is an act that you took that you're really ashamed of. And so when you open the light, you walk in that door and you revisit kind of the moment that led you to shut that door. Let's just say it's a horrible action or deed that you did. It's being able to look in that room and say, okay, what happened? Relive the story a little bit. Hey, I did this thing. But also to give your former self some grace in that moment and say, well, why did I do that thing? Was I acting like a horrible, wretched person? Did I do it because there's something wrong with me? What did I want that I couldn't have that caused me that? Right? Because behind every misdeed, I would say that we do is shame. When you're ashamed, you don't believe you're worthy for the things that you want. And so you find other ways to get those things that you want, which almost always cause a consequence of harm or injury to yourself and other people, right? For example, if I don't feel like I can have the affection of my wife, well, maybe I can get it from your wife, right? So maybe I commit adultery. Maybe I do something against you, against me, against my wife, against that woman, because it seems like the best way at the time to fulfill a need. I can't see any other option for you. You tracking with me?
yeah, and you were
Okay.
talking about the external, looking for it externally, and wanting someone else to like accept those rooms in your house that you'd closed off so you could accept them. And that's such a, from a man's, I want to say, logical side. I can't even see that. I can't even see how anybody would be like, I won't go in that room, but you can do it. You can open it for
Yeah.
me. Like,
Well,
that's such a ridiculous thought,
it's
but it's
it's
so true.
more it's more that we put a sign on the door that says, "Trust me,
It's
nothing
yeah.
heresy." Right? You're not
Well,
asking her to
yeah,
go in there usually, although some people do that tactic too, I think. And I don't think
right.
that.
Except that I closed it and leave it at that.
Yeah, just like trust me, I'm a good thing, even though 30 doors in my 100 room castle are shut. Nothing you need to worry about here, sweetheart. That's kind of how men start a relationship. Then maybe they mature, maybe they go to counseling, and they're maybe like, hey, would you walk in here with me? That's a big ask. I mean, it's a especially to a female to ask a woman like, hey, there's these creepy rooms in my castle I haven't been into for 30 years, and I shut the door because something scared the hell out of me back then. Hey, you want to walk in there with me and just deal with whatever comes up? Like, that's just straight up ignorant. But that's exactly what a lot of men do. That's more of a codependency model. Like, I need you to support me when I go in this room. And I'm not shaming a guy that thinks that way. It's just not an effective way to be in a relationship. A woman who loves you will probably go in a room, maybe two, and then she's going to say, there's way too much pressure in this relationship. This is too big an ask. I can't be what you need me to be. This is how it's going to come out in the speech with a partner or a prospective wife or a wife. They're going to say like, hey, I've got my own rooms to deal with, and you're asking me to kind of go in there and slay your dragons. It feels kind of icky to me. If you're in a romantic relationship, especially one that is a sexual relationship, it's going to be very off-putting to a woman to be in that role. She might do it, but she'll start being more of a friend than a lover, because women have to kind of draw upon a compassionate, like a motherly feeling energy, which they're very good at. But women can rarely wear that hat and the romantic, passionate lover hat at the same time. You'll feel very much like one of her kids if she's a mother. And so this starts to erode a lot of relationships. Now, who can walk in that room with you? Who's
Your
not?
boys.
What's that?
Your boys.
This is the benefit of having close brothers, who understand what's going on and who can walk into those rooms with you without judging you. And most men are missing that in their life, which is why I started communities like Mentoring Men, and why you guys, I think, are doing what you're doing, is you recognize the value that there are some rooms
Sven,
that,
what's the intimacy part when it comes to a relationship and sharing that with your
well,
partner?
intimacy is with a partner, you said? So
Yeah, because
intimacy
don't you want to, which you were talking about in the beginning, don't you want to reveal that stuff, or at least be able to, of course, with your
Well,
partner?
it's just a willingness to be able to, isn't it?
Yeah, you definitely want to in a person who's committed to you, I would suggest you need to understand what your value system says is an appropriate give and take level of understanding and commitment in a relationship to do this. We've all probably known the people who first date are telling people about all the rooms in their castle, right? That's not a way to generally have a second date. That's oversharing. That's like that
Oh,
that comes from a hunger
I
to
want to touch on that too at some
be
point.
accepted. So intimacy is really, and those people, to be clear, are being intimate, but they're a little hasty in that because they're looking for that person who they're oversharing with, usually to be an agent of fixing the stuff in that room. So
And that's, I would
healthy,
call that baggage.
yeah, baggage, sure.
Because
Um,
just in case that question comes up, to differentiate between that, the
well, and
difference
we all
between
have baggage. Baggage is the
absolutely. Oh
stuff.
yeah.
It's the stuff in those rooms. So intimacy is, on a lot of levels, I would say the very first layer of that, Daniel, is just letting people know that you're aware that you have rooms that are closed, and sharing that and being open and honest about that, um, and what your journey is like, but without asking the person to become responsible for the contents of that room or opening those doors. Um, there is a very kind of a worldview brewing that says, I can't open that door without you by my side. I would call that like the Jerry Maguire idea of you complete me, that basically without you, I'm not enough. I'm nothing. I don't think that's a healthy perspective, but that's what's kind of taught in the popular media. And I'm not saying that's not intimacy. I just don't think it's healthy intimacy. Intimacy is letting people see you, but healthy intimacy lets people see you because being seen is an act of acceptance. Firstly, your own self-acceptance, like but an unhealthy intimacy is just letting everybody see you, um, when you don't really accept you, and it's an act of trying to get acceptance. which I don't find that to be very fruitful, and I think a lot of people suffer for that. Does that answer your question, Daniel? If not, maybe you could ask me another one.
Kind of, sort of, not completely, but
Well, tell me more about what you're.
I just thought of a couple of things as you were speaking as well. Um, would it be intimate to share unconditionally?
It's sure that's intimate. I don't think that's wise.
Oh, she said it's not.
Again, it's
Okay,
like
yeah.
that's like putting my ATM, my bank account information on a t-shirt and walking around.
But is that always
The
it
Go
doesn't
ahead.
that doesn't seem the same um as like as shameful stories, putting your bank account out there.
Okay, would you take the most shameful thing you've ever done, put it on a t-shirt and walk around like the Burning Man festival? Well, maybe that's not a good example because that's a pretty shameless place, but um, whatever. The Red Sox game, Washington DC, like
Super.
what would be the benefit
Not
of
not
doing that?
really, but it's all I'm saying is it's not
It would be an act
like
of
they wouldn't
vulnerability.
have the same they wouldn't have they couldn't change something physically in my
Well,
like they couldn't change my bank account in that case. Like sure they could have a different
No, but
view about
people,
me, but
it goes like this, and I'll just tell you, I'll just share vulnerably and intimately, because I can share this with the crowd without really any problems. But Daniel, you were at this West Virginia retreat, so you know the context. I had a conversation with someone there about my first book, where I mentioned that I wrote the first draft in a day, and that I used AI as a way to sort through copious transcripts from my articles and videos I've been making over years. Um, I believe that person clearly has a problem with me, for other unrelated things. And so lo and behold, the other night, I find this information in an Amazon review with 1 star, not about my book, but about me. Um, really kind of clearly aimed at causing me harm. Now, why would a person cause another person harm using information that was shared with trust and in a private, intimate setting? Well, we do that when we feel like the best way to get our need met, maybe in my case, I would say this person's need is most likely that they don't feel good about themselves. And one cheap and easy and fast way to feel good about yourself is to feel better than another person. And so one way we feel better than other people is judging people. Hey, if I can think I'm better than you, then for a little bit, I get to feel okay because I feel superior. You guys, I know Daniel, you've gotten enough through the RMM program for to encounter this, but do you remember the pseudo elevation lesson, right? If I've got a crowd of people and I don't feel very good about myself, I don't know how to actually feel elevated, to feel a sense of value and worth and significance. One kind of easy way to do it is just make everybody else lower, right?
chop it all down.
So if we're all 6 feet and standing beside each other and I want to stand out, if I can make everybody think that you're 5 feet tall, I'm going to look like the clear leader and winner. But I actually haven't experienced any growth, transformation. I'm not exceptional. I'm just making other people believe that you're less. And so one of the ways people unfortunately use intimate details about other people, even if they don't harm us, is to try to get other people to think poorly of us. So somebody wants Amazon readers to think poorly of me. Now, I mean, that's their business. If somebody thinks that from that review, they're probably not a very intelligent reader, and probably not somebody that I would necessarily care if reads my book, right? But that's an example of where somebody can take something said, whether it has power over you or not, and just seek to cause you harm or injury. See what I mean?
Yeah, that makes more sense.
So
And I
even though I'm not ashamed of any of the stuff I told you, I'm not ashamed that I use the name Sven in mentoring. I've said since literally day one on my website that that's not my real name, why I do that, etc. That's all born from good, holy, virtuous reasons not to be inauthentic. But people are who have something to that they're looking for, who they can find that by elevating themselves above you, will take anything that they can in your life as a way to judge and compare and say, hey, I'm better than that guy. It's all judgment, right? And sometimes that can have consequences for you, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, what you said before that, it was wise. Andrew, sound like you have something else, but I want to ask this
Yeah, go ahead.
question real quick. Back to the intimacy part. So if it's only you going through the castle, opening all the doors to what you've closed years ago, and are confronting and find acceptance in that yourself, where's the intimacy you share when it comes to being in a relationship? If
let me
you're
and you can
I'd love to hear,
doing
love to
that,
hear
you
you
can
guys
build
talk
whatever
about
I
it.
have.
what was
Yeah.
that, Drew?
So from my understanding, and Sven, correct me and fill in anything I miss. Vulnerability is the prerequisite, right? So it doesn't serve you to walk around with your bank account on your shirt, but if you want to have intimacy with yourself or with someone else, you have to first have vulnerability on some level, right? Which depends on your value system based on that transaction with the other person. You're going to be more vulnerable with people you want to be closer with, like your friends and your family and your relationship. But you can't have intimacy with yourself or with anybody else if you don't first start with vulnerability. So the whole opening the door thing, it creates intimacy. All it does is open the door for you to be able to have intimacy with yourself, because it opens the door for you to be able to accept yourself. And if you create vulnerability by opening all these doors in your castle that are dark, you can then accept the fact that there's darkness in these rooms and let light in. And then you can say, wow, I really do love me, even when there's all these rooms I previously shut off. And most of them I didn't even need to shut off. And you can accept them for whatever reason. And you can realize that you didn't mean to close them, or you didn't have to close them. But it works with yourself just the way as it works with other people, because once you open those doors and allow for the vulnerability, and then you end up allowing for the acceptance, you also just make room for love. And obviously that's where the intimacy is, that connection.
One point of clarification, and maybe this might clear up some confusion, is when I say intimacy, I'm not moralizing that in a way that's saying intimacy is fundamentally good or bad, or that the intimacy on its own is good. If a robber has intimate knowledge of the alarm codes of your home, they have intimacy. That's intimacy. It doesn't mean it's good, right? So intimacy is just knowledge of something, like deep knowledge of a part of someone or something or a situation that is uncommon, that other people don't generally have. That's why I use the bank account, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So intimacy with myself is just, you could say, as a synonym or another way of saying self-awareness. You can't have self-awareness or intimacy with yourself while denying, while refusing, while ignoring. And so a stage of most men will go through at some point in their life is just plain old ignoring themselves. They'll just say, nope, not looking at that. And it's kind of like one of the first tactics we employ when we're trying to learn to cope with shame. And so you guys would know that from the RMM program as basically coping with shame. And what that looks like is you feel a hard emotion about yourself and you say, nope, stuff, I'm gonna put it away. I'm not gonna do that right now. Not looking at that door right now. And that's like nailing the door shut and running to the other side of the castle saying, I'm not looking in there, nothing to see here. But all of those closed doors, by the way, are the source of intense, hard emotions. And for men, they most often come out as anger, frustration, rage, some pretty ugly things, right? So if you hang on to a lot of your stuff and you refuse to open doors, you refuse to be intimate with yourself, the way that'll start bubbling to the surface is with a lot of repressed, hard emotions. And
Well,
what ends up happening is
you,
those come out in a toxic way at some point, and it's usually for many people, men, it'll be quite explosive, which is what the world is picking up on as like toxic. The term toxic masculinity, even though I hate that term, they're saying men kind of just blow up in rage because they're walking around with all this suppressed anger, emotion, shame, judgment, etc. They're not giving themselves the first step of intimacy with themselves, which is admitting I have baggage, I have stuff I don't like in my castle, and then taking the next step, which is the vulnerability step that Andrew mentioned, which is being willing to open the door and face what's in there, on your own, with a brother, maybe with a mental health professional, clergy, it could be whatever is your way of doing that. And whatever your inner state, whatever your relationship is like with yourself, will be the relationship quality you have with other people. So if I'm denying, nope, not going there, and I'm suppressing all of this hard emotions, I'm not going to have good relationships because I'm not going to let people see me because I don't let me see me. Follow that? So when we talk about intimacy with ourselves, we have to start with that.
Jordan Peterson always does this thing that I love, of defining stuff. And so you kind of did that yourself, Sven, when you first answered that question a minute ago, with some of the words you used. And so I would be curious, Daniel, when someone says intimacy, what other words, what synonyms come to mind? What would be your definition of
Connection.
intimacy using other words? Connection. That's one that I would use.
Yeah.
I would say love, personally. And so, like, how, like,
I want to.
from my point of view, how are you supposed to have that if you can't be vulnerable with yourself? So for anybody who's sitting there going, I want to experience connection, I want to experience intimacy, how do I experience these things? I'm looking outside of myself. I want my girlfriend or my boyfriend or someone else or my parents to make me feel loved and connected in intimacy. It's really because you haven't taken that first step with yourself of
the doors are closed.
being vulnerable. Yeah.
What people are saying, and I talk to a lot of men, right? Hundreds a year. And really everything that they are complaining about, when we distill it down, the word connection comes to the top more than any other word. It's what every human is looking for. Because they believe they're disconnected. And I want you to understand this. It's really important for you and your listeners the same to get this. The thing that's making you disconnected is not other people. It's that you have those closed rooms. There's a whole like huge portion of your inner castle that is off limits to you. That's the feeling of disconnection. When people say, hey, you're a swell guy, and oh, I think you're cute, I think you're handsome, or people give you sexual or romantic attention, that kind of gives men a little bit of a boost. Oh, see, maybe I'm okay. And then they get addicted to that external validation, even though those people don't know what's in those rooms, right? And so what you end up having to do is you have to chase things, people, experiences that make you feel good, but it's very temporal, right? And it's not satisfying, and people feel disconnected again, sometimes an hour later, sometimes moments later, sometimes days later. And I would suggest what's causing that feeling of disconnection is the closed doors. And I lived this, right? So it wasn't until I started opening those doors, letting light in, filling those rooms with love, which used to be filled with shame, that I noticed I don't feel disconnected anymore. And nobody's giving me disconnection. Nobody's actually interesting. And let me just say this, and then I'll shut up. When I lived in that scenario, love and connection were like winning the lottery. It felt so hard to find and so fleeting. And my own coach and mentor, is prone to say you can't have enough of what you really don't need. And so I would be like addicted to this kind of attention from women and other people. I would need people to see me, and then maybe a couple hours later be like I'd have this emotional crash and feel low and feel bored and listless, and then I would need to find another way to get people to look at me and say, "Oh, you're awesome," and then that would you crash, and it's like this cycle because you're looking outside of yourself. And as soon as you become aware inside that you're disconnected again, the whole feeling goes away, right? And so the long-term root cause solution is open those doors and fill them with love. And then you have wholeness. And so now I have kind of a consistent, ongoing level of acceptance, love, connection, appreciation, because I'm not disconnected with myself. And interestingly, people want to come and be a part of the castle. Like my wife, it's easy to relate because there's nothing hidden there. There's no dank, nasty places where mold grows or goblins are in there. Like I have no places that I know of that are closed to me. And if I should find them, I know exactly what to do, and I do that. That's what I would say men's work is.
You mentioned consistent wholeness, and I think that's important because that just strikes me. The way I interpret it is it's going to be consistent, but there's still going to be hiccups, So like even if you experience something, just like when you were talking about hitting those huge highs where you're like, man, I always feel disconnected, and then I get something and I'm like, wow, this feels so good, I feel so great, right? And then it goes away. The other way, it works the other way too, because even when you do find that source of self connection within yourself and you experience that, you're still going to have moments of doubt and lack of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But I
Sometimes
want
the
to
wind blows and
throw
slams a door shut, and you start easily
temporarily.
believing again that you're disconnected,
You
especially
just
when you're
got to open it.
tired. Yeah.
Let me throw a math equation in there for anybody who's a mathematical person to keep it simple. When you the connection portion certainly was very personal for me. I know that when I came here to your um, group, um, I wanted to feel more connection. I know I've been looking for that a long time in my life. So anybody else who can relate, you said that was one of the things men seem to be looking for most from your experience. And I think that's very true. I think there's a lot of people who are watching this who are probably looking for that as well. And
Mhm.
so I would say if you're feeling disconnected, disconnection equals a lack of acceptance. And that's on a
100%.
personal level, a very personal level. It means a lack of self-acceptance. It means
Yes.
you're feeling disconnected is because you, not pointing fingers, but you have not accepted a part of yourself. And because of that, nobody else is going to be able to connect and accept that part. You
Yeah.
have to go first in, opening that door like we talked about earlier, because it's you. If you can't accept you, why would anybody else?
People are utterly convinced though that connection comes to us from other people, and that's a nuanced topic
Oh, we're
to
here to kick that out of there.
talk about. Well, it's interesting, right? So what I like to take guys through a little mental exercise, especially if they've used dating apps or done any kind of dating, is or just known anybody. Have you ever known a situation where you were with another human being and you felt really connected, only to find out that they didn't feel that way? Like maybe you had a first date with somebody and you're like, oh, I felt really connected. And when would you like to get together again? And the person's like, yeah, no, thanks, not interested. I didn't feel that. So that's kind of a good evidence that two people can experience the same moment and relationship completely different, which means connection doesn't come from the other person. It comes from our insides. It comes from our beliefs about what's happening, what just happened. And once that's kind of where the superpower begins, guys, is that you understand that connection has always been about your relationship with yourself and what you happen to be thinking. So if you think you're disconnected, which you're going to learn throughout life that you are, by the way, that's what shame and judgment do. They teach you that you're disconnected. You're going to live in a state of connection. I'm sorry, disconnection. If you think you're not disconnected and you're really convinced you're not, you're going to feel the benefits of being connected. But it's not coming from someone. When a man and woman have sex, for example, there's no molecule called connection that's traveling from the woman through a man's body and hitting some sort of place that says, oh, he's connected now. Like, connection is not provided to us. It's not, I would suggest too, and this is where it gets nuanced, you can't provide connection to someone else. You can offer them acceptance, and that may meet a short-term temporary deficit that they have. And I think that is a gift to give each other, meaning I accept you guys, right? So when
But it
you
can turn
came to
into meeting their dependency.
yeah, that's it. That's it, right? So I can offer support. I can support you in your need for connection, but I cannot become the dependent source. And that's a huge distinction that takes time for men to explain. So when I met you guys, I'm aware, of course, both of you are feeling disconnected. I can offer you connection that kind of bridges the gap a little bit, meaning I can accept you and offer you unconditional high regard. I can offer you warmth, compassion, curiosity, companionship. I can show you agape, but I can't be the source of that for the long term. That's not healthy. That's what, Daniel, to your point, that becomes dependency. That's no longer support, which is somebody helping somebody to meet a need that's ultimately their responsibility. Whereas dependency says, hey, I need you to become responsible for this thing that is otherwise my responsibility. And that'll absolutely ruin friendships, romantic relationships, parent-child relationships. Dependency, for for otherwise healthy, able people is not a good outcome, especially in a relationship. So we can offer people short-term like connection by just not judging them. So one thing I think is worth raising here in this conversation is that whatever you judge, you disconnect from, right? And go back to the castle. If I judge that room as having something worthless and nasty and dark and shameful in it, I disconnect from the room. I shut the door and I move away from it. And so when you judge one another, if you two judge each other, I positively guarantee you will move away from each other. You'll feel hesitant to relate. You'll back away from getting together. You'll back away from communicating because we disconnect from what we judge. So if I connect with myself, I have to stop judging myself. That's a absolute necessary first step. And then from that place, if I judge somebody else, I'm going to disconnect from them, and people can feel that. So I do think humans have kind of this very innate, intuitive understanding of when someone else is judging us. It's like we feel it. I don't know quite how, but we feel it. We feel them go to like pull away. We feel the judgment.
Below the surface.
What's that?
Below the surface.
Yeah, somewhere below the surface. I think it's probably, quantum, or what we would maybe describe as spiritual in some
Or
settings.
I
But
mean,
we
we
feel
interpret their demeanor maybe sometimes.
yeah, it's one way or the other. We feel the disconnection. But here's where it gets tricky in a relationship with the romantic partner is, let's say I'm relating to my wife and my wife is walking around judging herself. Now, I may have total acceptance for her and have no judgment for her, but she still may feel disconnected because she's got all these doors shut she's not willing to look at. She's judging herself. And so she may say, hey, I really feel disconnected right now. And what I have to do as a man, a husband, is to have this understanding. I have to first check with myself. Well, am I judging her in some way? No. Okay. So this isn't that I'm doing something, even though she may blame and attribute her feeling of disconnection to me, because this is what we do. We judge ourselves and then we blame other people for it. So I have to have the insight of wisdom to say, okay, it doesn't matter why she feels disconnected. She feels disconnected. And I could do the same thing with a friend. And again, I have to push dependency. I have to resist dependency while offering support. So what that means in a romantic relationship is just moving closer, moving deeper in, offering my wife more warmth, more compassion, more love, more understanding. I have to do this with my kids too. That just kind of transcends their own self-judgment and lets them hear somebody in the world saying, I accept you, right? That's, I think, is healthy in a relationship. But if my wife grew to need that every 5 minutes every day, I can positively assure you it would erode our relationship, because she has to also live in a place where she knows how to, you know, give herself intimacy, give herself a release of judgment, because that's really the only way long term to live in a state of connection, is you have to be connected with yourself.
And I think honestly, on the converse side of that, that's you're seeing a very similar thing when you talked about earlier the those highs you get from when you meet someone and go on a first date. It's very similar where you're experiencing connection because you're accepting yourself in that moment. You're accepting who you are, even if it's limited to the point where you actually allow yourself to connect. But anyway, we're getting ready to wrap up here. And I want to give you, Sven, a minute to share where people can reach you at. But first, I want to remind everybody that, if you're on a journey for connection and intimacy, it starts with the connection of yourself and the self intimacy. That's where you should start. And that's where I encourage you to start is connecting and becoming more intimate with yourself. And that is done through being vulnerable with yourself, right? Again, where this all started from, intimacy is the letting of the private parts of yourself be seen, or in math format, vulnerability equals intimacy. So anyway, thanks for joining us. And Sven, where can we find you if anybody who sees this wants to?
Sure. Yeah. The best way to connect with me is just probably via email, sven@svenmasterson.com, or you can go to my website and check that out. Or to connect with, for your audience, I would say for them to connect with you guys, because, you're on this journey, you know what it's like to walk with each other on that experience. I would say any of us, but if they want to talk to me specifically, I have conversations with men all the time, and I can share with them kind of my clean the castle program, you could say. So that's the best way.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. It was a fascinating conversation. I hope you guys watching enjoyed it. And all of us here at the Hype Mind, peace. We'll catch you on the other side.
All right. Take care, guys. See you.